In 1924, miners blasting limestone in a South African cave pulled out a tiny skull. It belonged to a child, barely 3 years old. Scientists named it the Taung Child, and it became one of the most important fossils in human history. For decades, everyone assumed a leopard or a saber-tooth had killed it. That made sense. Africa was full of big cats. But then in 1995, two researchers named Lee Berger and Ron Clark looked at the skull again. And they noticed something that everyone had missed. There were puncture marks at the bottom of the eye sockets, and the pattern didn't match any cat. It matched an eagle. A massive prehistoric eagle had grabbed this child, punched its talons through the eyes, and carried it away. The first famous fossil of a human ancestor wasn't a hunter. It was something's lunch. And that discovery opened up a question that most history books completely ignore. We all grow up hearing the same story. Humans evolved, stood upright, grabbed a spear, and took over. Man the hunter, apex predator from day one. But in 2005, two anthropologists named Donna Hart and Robert Sussman looked at the actual fossil evidence and published a book called Man the Hunted. And their argument was simple. For at least 4 million years, early hominids weren't hunting much of anything. They were small. They were slow. And they were surrounded by animals that were specifically built to kill them. The fossil record backs this up in a way that's honestly hard to argue with. At Swartkrans Cave, also in South Africa, scientists found a hominin skull fragment called SSK54. It had two perfectly circular puncture wounds in the top of the cranium, spaced exactly 33 millimeters apart. That spacing matches the lower canine teeth of a leopard, and a fossil leopard jaw recovered from the same cave fits those holes almost perfectly. Here's the detail that makes it worse. Leopards don't eat on the ground. They drag their kills up into trees to keep scavengers away. Scientists believe that many of these hominin bones ended up in caves because leopards were eating our ancestors on branches overhead, and the scraps just fell in. Our ancestors weren't buried. They were discarded. And leopards were far from the only problem. In Tanzania's Olduvai Gorge, paleontologists found the remains of a prehistoric crocodile and gave it the name Crocodilus anthropophagus. That literally translates to the crocodile that eats humans. They chose that name because hominin bones were found alongside it with bite marks that matched its jaw. This animal was roughly 19 feet long, had bony horn-like ridges above its ears, and a deep, heavy skull designed for grabbing and holding. And it lived in the exact waterways where early humans had to drink. Think about that for a second. Every time your ancestor walked to a river for water, this thing could have been sitting just beneath the surface, waiting. Then there was Dinophilis, a muscular, stocky cat, often called a false saber-tooth, whose fossils keep showing up in the same South African cave deposits as hominin remains. Scientists used to call it a specialized human hunter, though recent research suggests it was more of a generalist, but it was still a powerful ambush predator sharing tight cave spaces with our ancestors. That's not a comforting roommate. But perhaps the most disturbing predator is still alive today. The African crowned eagle weighs about 10 pounds, and it routinely kills monkeys twice its own body weight by diving from the forest canopy, crushing the skull on impact, and puncturing through the eye sockets to feed on the brain. When researchers collected modern monkey skulls from beneath crowned eagle nests and compared them to the Taung Child, the damage patterns were almost identical. Same orbital fractures, same puncture locations, same can opener style skull breaks. For millions of years, something was hunting our ancestors from the sky, and they probably never saw it coming. This raises a question that doesn't get asked nearly enough. If humans haven't been regular prey for thousands of years, why are you still afraid of the dark? You live in a building with walls, locks, and electric lights. Nothing is stalking you. But the second the lights go off, your body does something interesting. Your pupils dilate, your hearing sharpens, your heart rate ticks up. You want to put your back against something solid. You scan the room for movement even though you know nothing is there. That reaction isn't random. Evolutionary psychologists have a name for it, the better safe than sorry mechanism. The idea is straightforward. In the ancestral environment, if your ancestor heard a rustle in the dark and panicked over nothing, the cost was a few seconds of stress. If they heard a rustle and ignored it, and it turned out to be a leopard, the cost was their life. So over millions of years, natural selection just kept the anxious ones. The relaxed ones got eaten. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And he was right. Most fears are imaginary, but for the people who came before us, that overactive imagination was the only reason they survived the night. That chill you feel when something moves at the edge of your vision. The instinct to look up when a large bird passes overhead. The uncomfortable feeling of standing in an open field with nowhere to hide. Those responses aren't bugs in your programming. They're features, written by millions of years of being on the wrong end of the food chain. So how did we go from being on the menu to running the restaurant? It didn't happen overnight. And it wasn't one single breakthrough. It was a slow accumulation of advantages that eventually tipped the balance. Fire was probably the biggest one. Sometime around 1 million years ago, Homo erectus figured out how to control flames. And fire did something that nothing else in nature had ever done. It created a hard boundary, a line that predators genuinely would not cross. For the first time in millions of years, a group of hominins could sleep on the ground and actually expect to wake up. Then came better weapons. The crude rocks that earlier hominids used gave way to sharpened wooden spears and carefully crafted Acheulean hand axes. Suddenly, a human didn't need to be faster than a predator. They just needed to make the encounter painful enough that the predator decided it wasn't worth it. But the real game changer was cooperation. One human alone is easy prey. But a coordinated group of 20, screaming and throwing rocks and waving burning branches, that is genuinely terrifying to a lone predator. Humans didn't win because they became physically stronger. They won because they learned to fight as a unit. And here's the part that keeps scientists up at night. The very things that make humans special, our oversized brains, our complex language, our deep social bonds, may have evolved specifically because we were being hunted. Predation pressure forced our ancestors to think faster, communicate better, and trust each other more deeply. The creatures that terrorized us for 4 million years may have accidentally created the species that would eventually dominate the entire planet. As Charles Darwin once observed, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And our ancestors changed. They changed because they had to. For millions of years, every morning started with the same reality. Every shadow on the savannah could hide a leopard. Every riverbank might conceal a 19-foot crocodile. Every clear sky could contain an eagle dropping toward your child at a speed you couldn't react to. And those ancestors had no real natural weapons. No claws, no venom, no armor plating. What they had was each other, and the fear that kept them together. Today, every predator that once fed on humans is either extinct or actively avoids us. Leopards stay away from human settlements. Crocodiles flee from motorboats. The crowned eagle is endangered because we leveled its forests. The predators lost completely. But they left something behind. That feeling you get when you walk through a dark hallway. That instinct to glance over your shoulder in an empty parking lot. That quiet, sourceless certainty that something, somewhere, is watching you.